can I please take some nominations for chair?
I propose Mr. Peter Farley.
Do I have a seconder?
Councillor, sorry. I don't see Mr. Very
Okay,
sorry, I
so
apologise.
Councillor Farley, you are the chair of today's meeting.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hazel. And once again, I'm dragged screaming and protesting towards the chair. But in all seriousness, welcome to this meeting. Thank you for asking me to chair it. It also addresses a number of practical issues. Hopefully we won't be going on for longer than the advertised time, but if we do, I'm very conscious that one or two members will need to leave, and as that would affect our ability, if we needed it at that stage, to make proper conclusions or recommendations, I'm keen for us to try to finish as close to 4 o'clock as possible. We are quorate. We've double-checked. This is a joint meeting of two committees. We do satisfy the criteria for being quorate, but it will only take one member to leave the room under any circumstances whatsoever for us not to be quorate, and that would be regrettable, I think. So, welcome to this joint meeting. Do we have any apologies, please, before I go around and introduce those who are here?
Yep, we've received apologies from Councillors Ruth Edwards, Doug Edwards, Roger Harris, Simon Howarth, Anne Webb and David Evans, and Delia Hudson.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Clough.
And Mr. Keith Plough? He's passed his apologies on as well, yes. Right, can we begin then by introducing ourselves, beginning with the lady on my left, your right.
Hello, I'm Councillor Penny Jones and I'm Chair of Children and Young People.
Hazel Eilert, Scrutiny.
Paula Harris, Democratic Services.
Councillor Jeff Burrows, Cabinet Member, Social Care, Safeguarding and Health.
Matthew Gatehouse, Policy and Performance Manager.
Claire Marchant, Chief Officer, Social Care and Health.
Councillor Maureen Powell, Councillor for Castlewood, Abergavenny.
Colin Robertshaw, Co-opted Member, Parent Governor, Monmouth Comprehensive School.
Councillor Alan Wintle, Member for Drybridge and Monmouth.
Councillor Martin Hickman, Lymph Voice Ward and member of both CYP and adults.
Councillor Val Smith, observing.
Thank you. Just in time to introduce herself.
Julie Boothroyd, Head of Adult Services.
Thank you. And I'm Councillor Peter Farley. I'm the member for St Mary's Ward, Chepstow, member of both Adults and Children and Young People's Committee. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming today. It is warm in here, so if anybody does wish, either now or subsequently, to divest at least appropriate parts of their clothing, they're very welcome to do so. It is warm, and I don't think we can do much about it as it happens. We will be joined as we go on by representatives from CSSIW, but they will come into the room at a later point, sort of mystery guests really. So, going with the agenda, are there any declarations of interest in any items on the agenda that anyone wishes to make? In which case then, can I suggest that we take it as and when, if things do arise, as may well be the case. Thank you very much. So, our first substantive item on the agenda. Oh, I've forgotten to do something very important in terms of the introductions. Can I welcome Paula, who I think is clerking one or other of these committees for the first time. Welcome. We hope that it won't be too traumatic for you. Claire, this is your first joint meeting, but not your first select committee meeting, so everybody else, I think, has been before.
Sorry,
it's all right.
Subtle.
We should have had a bit of accompanying music for that, really, because it was very nicely done. I'm going to ask Matthew to introduce the item 3, risk assessment for social services. He will take us through, and then we can, as usual, ask questions and join in any discussion. Matthew, we're in your hands.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is an item that members have seen on a regular basis over the last couple of years, but bearing in mind it tends to arrive just once a year before Select Committee, I'll just give a brief bit of background. So the purpose of the report is to provide members with an overview of the current strategic risks facing the authority. Now, these have come through a number of sources, reports from regulators, issues identified by teams as part of the service planning process, and also issues identified as this has sort of progressed through discussions with officers culminating at strategic leadership team. What we tend to do now with our risk assessment, these are all the sort of risks facing the authority that we classify as high or medium level. Those which are lower are managed within services, within the service plans, not necessarily of a level where it's they need to be brought before committee. But if members desire sight of any of those, they're available on the hub as part of service planning. The purpose of bringing it before you today is to get members' views on the risks there, to see whether the risks are appropriately captured, that the level of risk that has been applied is appropriate, and that any mitigating actions are proportionate and appropriate to the actions proposed next to them. I mean, we are keen, so what we do with this, it's a live document, it's signed off once a year by Cabinet, and that'll be taking place in February. So in terms of the Select Committee role, there's that identification of anything which you as members feel may be missing, but it's also that opportunity to use this to feed into your work programme and identify any areas which will lead to further work, or you wish to explore sort of further areas of questioning with officers. Clearly, the breadth of coverage is enormous, and I don't necessarily expect to be able to answer every single issue in relation to questions posed to this today, but what it does do is give you that scope to invite officers in future that may be able to cover off some of these issues. A couple of changes to the process from when it would have last been before you as members, and that is in terms of the way risks are scored. Page 12 of the bundle has a grid, and it talks about the consequence or the severity of something happening, and also the likelihood. So, and that sort of can be equated into overall high, medium, and low level risks. So previously those were just numbered. Now there's much clearer language next to them. It talks about major, substantial, moderate, and minor, whereas it was previously numbered. And the change relating to that in particular is we now rank risks as sort of pre and post mitigation. Basically, what's sort of the initial level of risk, and then we look again at having applied a mitigating action, has that resulted in a lower risk level, and hopefully that will enable you as members to see whether the mitigating actions are hitting the spot in terms of the areas they should. So, Chair, with your permission, I'll just highlight a couple of areas in the risk assessment. This is going through all 4 select committees. What you have before you is the whole council risk assessment. So there are 3 risks in this which are whole council issues, and 3 which come within the remits of both adults and children's. So if I just take them in order, the first risk as we move into Appendix 1 of the report, which is, if I just read that out, the authority is unable to deliver its political priorities in the future because it does not yet have clarity on its future business model. And that's the issue. We have a 3-year medium-term financial plan. However, if we look at issues like the Future Generations Act that's coming in now, it's increasingly saying public bodies should be planning on either a 10-year or a 25-year basis. Now, clearly, we're dealing with funding on a 1-year basis from Welsh Government. Yet, nonetheless, you look at the challenges facing us in the coming years. looking 2 to 3 years ahead does pose risks for us. The second risk is that services may become financially unsustainable in the short to medium term because of reducing budgets and increasing demand. The third risk, related to that but a slightly separate issue, is a potential failure to meet income targets, which could result in sort of unplanned changes to services. Now, it's different from the financially unsustainable one in that income targets are increasingly a part of local authority budgets in a way in which they haven't previously. And that's something which we need to think of as slightly differently to the other issue. Now, one of the things we've done around mitigation in that in the past term, members have agreed an appointment on a fixed term basis of a marketing officer to work with services to drive up income levels. So, for example, they've been working with the school meal service. They're working with leisure services to try and drive up those services where there is a commercial element to try and increase the income levels and mitigate or reduce the potential impact of budget shortfalls. And then the three areas which touch more on the portfolio of the joint committee today. Risk number 6, potential risk for significant harm to children and vulnerable people. And there's two elements to that, one of which is the harm that always exists because of the nature of society, the elements which are unpredictable, unknown, and beyond our control. And then secondly, the elements which we are in control of. So, for example, through our safeguarding work, protection of vulnerable adults and the safeguarding unit. So elements within our control, elements without our control. And it's important to recognise the two different parts of those indicators. And we know that we will never eliminate that risk entirely. We wish it was so, but history tells us that unfortunately these things will occur. And risk number 7, which is around meeting the needs of individual learners, the potential failure that individual learners may not achieve their potential, which is looking towards the school environment. One other I probably should have touched on actually, which is the risk number 5, that the potential that the council doesn't address all areas of underperformance identified by regulators. We've had some really solid years of performance as a local authority over the last 2 to 3 years, a real positive trajectory of performance. Clearly, the authority, as we speak, remains in special measures, although all feedback received to date has been incredibly positive from the MRB, and certainly we've had some messages informally from Estin as a result of the inspection. But as it stands, the authority is in special measures, which remains a risk. And that of itself informs the judgment which other regulators have of us. So from a perspective of Wales Audit Office, they judge us as having sort of uncertain prospects for improvement while we remain in special measures. And that is rightly so, because we have to demonstrate, not just on our own terms, but on the terms of regulators looking at us, that we're addressing those risks and those issues. So, Chair, if you're happy with that, I'll pause there and happy to respond to any questions.
Matthew, thank you very much. Now, colleagues obviously have had the benefit of looking at this before the meeting. The fact that one or two areas are of greater significance for this committee doesn't mean that members couldn't, if necessary, ask or raise issues around any of the others. So I think the simplest way to do this is to very quickly go through in kind of numerical order, and if members do wish to ask a question or raise an issue in some way, that will be the opportunity to do it, because there is a fair amount of crossover. And those of us who were here in the chamber this morning when we brought 4 select committees together, there isn't yet a special collective name for that, but Jamboree would probably do, borrowed from the Scouts. Will be aware that even if you think you're looking at a focused and distinct issue, there will inevitably be crossover to others. So I wouldn't want to prevent any member from feeling able to question or comment, but the time that we spend might not be equal with each. So firstly then, and thank you for that introduction, Matthew, are there any members who wish to ask a question or make a comment about number 1 as we go to the appendix 1? Item 1, authority is unable to deliver its priorities in the future. Are there any issues about that?
Can I ask? Matthew, I'd just like to ask, the introduction of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, do you think that would have more of an impact, something that deserves its own comment, or what? I know you put it in reason why identified, but is there a risk attached to it?
Yeah, I think it feeds into a number of areas of risk. I mean, it's at this stage, as we're sort of looking at the potential impact, potential fallout of that, part of it is reputational. You know, this is a piece of legislation which we must comply with. Now, Cabinet received a report from Wales Audit Office in terms of how we were handling that, and that's also good. Apologies, both Cabinet and Audit Committee have received that report, and I think we're sort of on track regards to that. It is a challenge for us, but one I don't think, when we look at the potential to deliver mitigating actions against it, one which is a residual significant risk that warrants its own mention, because we have the resources and plans in place to at least comply with the letter of the Act. Of course, the generational challenges are huge, and the issues, when you look at the issues behind them, of course, they are significant, and one which no single organisation, or even collection of organisations like the Public Service Board, could adequately hope to address. But as far as meeting the letter of the Act goes, I think we're comfortable with where it sits.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any more at this stage? We're looking at the early part at number 1, which we could then move to 2 if there aren't any further issues. Councillor Jones quite rightly reminded us about the impact of the Act. Some other things that are mentioned there, workforce and so on, will no doubt come up in other parts as well, because that, I think, is another issue of concern. If you're happy then, we'll go to item 2, which is that some services may become financially unsustainable in the short to medium term as a result of reducing budgets and increasing demand. And somewhere closely related will be the next one, item 3, around income generation. If nobody has a question or an observation, perhaps I could make one. I think we simply need to remind ourselves as a committee that there are that we do keep under close eye with our officers the financial standing, if you like, of the services that we are, as it were, responsible for. There are 2, though, that have particularly come to our attention. Well, 3 really. Children's Social Services does have and has had real budgetary issues, and Cabinet has worked with officers and with us to address that. And I don't know whether Jeff will want to say something about that, even though the figures aren't here. But then there's 2 other services not necessarily represented today by officers, the Youth Service and Adult Education, both of which come under one or other of the committees, where there are considerable efforts being made to reconfigure the service, and there's an income generation component in both. But Jeff, I don't know whether you want to take this opportunity to say something about financial sustainability, because to be fair, you've taken considerable steps in this area.
Thank you, Chairman. No, other than just to continue to reiterate, as I've taken every opportunity before, to assure members of the continuing support that I get from Cabinet colleagues in the utmost importance that's given to the social care budget for children's adults also, but certainly the children's side of things, where because it is an under-resourced directorate and the pressures that are put on, the statutory nature of what is a daily challenge has come about, that the Cabinet has understood fully the nature of the pressures and has supported accordingly with funds not only to mitigate in the short term, but also for longer term investor save opportunity to actually start mitigating down the increasing levels of the complex demand that we're facing. So just to remind everyone that we are, that I've got Cabinet colleagues who are thoroughly supportive of what's going on and will continue to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. I keep having to nudge myself and remind myself that it's a joint meeting and it's adults as well as children. That's right, yes. Only being on children's, but I do know about adults being one. We have the difficulty of finances all the time. And obviously, with young children, they can't generate any money themselves. But when you come to the Youth Council and some of the adults, even if they're vulnerable adults, they do, I know some of them, and can be encouraged to do things which can generate a certain amount of income. And in some ways, if you've got, I have a grandson who's 18 and he's a special needs child, if you can encourage them to do something which may produce some income for what wherever they are, it gives them a sense of purpose and makes them feel better. And I wonder if that's the line we could go down to encourage, or shouldn't we do that?
Sorry, we have had Tracy in from the Youth Services, and she has, they've got income generation schemes, and to me they did, if I recall correctly, they involved the young people themselves very much. So I think we're going on the right lines for that. I mean, the question is how much income will it generate, and are they realistic targets? But I think, yes, that is the way to go.
As much, I know they were doing that, but as much with some of the adults that are in that situation, it just as it may help them in more ways than one.
Julie, Claire, I don't know whether you want to say anything about this.
I think it'd be useful to just share a little bit from the adults' perspective. I don't know if members who are on the adult committee know about this, but perhaps not on the children. A programme that we have called the My Day, My Life approach, which runs out of a number of hubs in Monmouthshire. And the whole focus of that approach is about giving people a sense of purpose, etc. And on the back of that, not necessarily around income generation, but definitely about having a better life and being able to be more connected and ultimately, potentially, to be able to move away from services, which in effect is another way of us then being able to look at in the longer term what our, if you like, our service land bubble is. So I agree, there are many opportunities. It's definitely the direction of travel that we're going in.
Councillor Wintle.
Thank you, Chair. I can't believe that, the pressure, because of the financial pressures the department's under, you've got to identify the risks of not complying with the legislation changes of, for example, Welsh language standards. Well, I like the language, don't get me wrong, but I don't like it being rammed down my throat. And at the present moment, it's being rammed down our throats. But to having to take up officer time and funding to comply with this seems ridiculous.
Anybody wants to respond on that? Matthew, were you going to take that one on? Thank you.
I'll come back on that one because Welsh language comes within my team. I mean, within Monmouthshire, we're quite fortunate regarding these standards. They are law, and regardless of individual opinions on them, we're in Wales and we have to comply with them. As far as the current year goes, clearly we've got the Eisteddfod, and there'll be a lot of focus on our Welsh language service. But one thing I would say, recognising the point you make, Councillor Wintle, is our officers of Alan, our Welsh language officers, been in correspondence with the Welsh Language Commissioner. We've applied to have a sort of lesser regard to certain standards, which has lowered the long-term cost. We're still in a position of dialogue regarding the timescales for some others, and that has resulted in a substantial reduction of these costs against those which we could have borne it had the measure applied to us in full, and certainly the costs we're forecasting against it are considerably lower than a number of other authorities.
Happy with that, Councillor Wintle?
Well, happier.
Happier. The other comments that you made perhaps need to be done in other places, but just to say that we do have a distinct, as I understand it, we do have a specific budget for Welsh language activity. It's a limited one, but it's not large at all. But we need to remember, whether we like it or not, that the consequence of not complying would be significant fines. So I think the prudent approach that the authority adopts of doing what it has to do is always done in the light of the consequences of not doing what it should do. But I can understand the point that you make, and it applies to a number of service areas, I'm sure. Okay, thank you very much. Any more commentary, please, on 2 or 3? Okay. Can we move then to 4, which is specific perhaps to the Children and Young People's Committee, a risk that we're familiar with and that we have gone into in considerable detail on other occasions, to do with the impact on the schools programme of capital receipts not being generated, and then of course the subset of that, the pressure on the capital budget that the 21st Century Schools programme represents. There's nothing there that we've not talked about in some detail. If anybody does want to add anything, that's your opportunity to do so. Otherwise, I think we should say that we continue to give this full consideration in Children and Young People's meetings. Okay. Happy with that? Moving then to number 5, and perhaps particularly apposite, Matthew rightly drew our attention to this one. We've just had an extended visit by Estin. I think they were here for the best part of a week, following up previous work. Later on our agenda is CSSIW's report. We've also had corporate assessment by WAO. So the impact on us of recommendations and the requirements on us made by regulators and the recommendations that they make are extremely pertinent. When Matthew spoke earlier, he talked about the MRB. And for those not familiar with the terminology, that may be members of Adults Committee. That's the Ministerial Recovery Board, which has been in place as part of the special measures introduced for the Education Service. We're at a curious point here because, as elsewhere on the agenda, we're looking at reports that were made when they were made. In one case some time ago, in others quite recently, but all will be changed, really, in light of what Estin might be telling us, as I gather, early in the new year. And that's important because people like the Wales Audit Office put caveats in their assessments, and they basically say, well, if you can sort of be taken out of special measures, then the import of what we're saying will change. And it's pretty much the same with this, isn't it?
Could I ask Matthew a question?
Please.
Matthew, as a result of that, I mean, some of the CYP risks are mitigated, aren't they, if the Estin report is positive? This is presented to us now in December, and the next one will be December 2016. I was just wondering, can there be any changes been made post the report in January, if it comes in January or whenever? Because it seems a very long time to have a series of older risks that perhaps aren't as relevant.
Absolutely. Actually, a very good question. This is something we changed last year, and I think member feedback was important in making that change. So, whereas the risk assessment is only formally signed off by Cabinet once a year, we update it on the hub, the authority's intranet site, as new evidence comes in. So it's available for examination and can be brought up for scrutiny at any moment. So when, for example, we get feedback from Estin in the new year, we will alter this report. But clearly, with the amount of business it would take, we won't keep bringing it back every time there's a change.
Thank you.
Thank you. Similarly, looking at number 5 again, going across to the right-hand column, understandably, you've got the 3 different years looking at risks, 15, 16, 16, 17, 17. But the future actions and timescales in the column next to that, next to the dates, the future actions and timescales, is not necessarily matching against the dates, is it? So presumably completing a review of our self-evaluation procedure isn't something for 2017 to 18. It's probably ongoing as we speak, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Those are not meant to align. So all of the actions are kind of front-loaded, if you like, towards the current period of time, and should result in reduced risk levels in future years, as we sort of reduce the likelihood of something happening. But no, they're not one risk per year. Jay, absolutely right.
And I think we can say, certainly from the children and young people's perspective, that we've seen the self-evaluation work develop. And I would imagine that we will be also seeing similar developments on the adult side, won't we, of the self-evaluation work. Am I right about that, Claire? Julie? Self-evaluation surely is part of what you do as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it very much for us fits in with our ACRF process, which then feeds into the director's annual council reporting framework. And then as director, I'm statutorily required to produce an annual report, which is informed by that self-evaluation. So there's quite a history of that process across authorities.
Thank you. So again, speaking from, as this is a joint meeting, members of both committees, I think, can be satisfied that these processes are in place and regularly come before us. Thank you. We're now looking at 6 then, by my reckoning, which is the safeguarding one, and as you will not need me to tell you, that's an issue of considerable salience in both committees. Jeff, as the safeguarding cabinet member, do you want to say anything about this before people ask questions?
No, Chair, I'm content to listen in and answer specifically, but other than say that obviously there's been a huge amount of work on safeguarding, and not least tied in with the Estin position. So I feel there's an awful lot of linkage between these. But no, happy to ask to receive any questions as and when.
Are there any questions? This is one of the items that is a bit problematic this afternoon, because you've got a report coming later, which is now quite matured, shall we say, which would suggest that things need to be done, when in fact a huge amount has been done and continues to be done. And I just ask members to bear that in mind, and people watching, because one of the real issues that we face on occasions like this is that the publicly presented material may not actually be as timely as it needs to be, and that's something we might want to consider later in our agenda. Councillor Powell.
Yes, that's really what I was going along the lines. All the time that I've been a governor, I've been to so many different safeguarding trainings, and over the years they've improved a great deal, and I'm going to yet another one, I think on January, and I'm sure I shall learn even more. And I think this is a witness the fact that we are improving how we look at safeguarding, and we are finding more ways which we can take care of both the children and vulnerable adults, because it is something that's very important. And the fact that I'm not going and seeing the same thing over again means we're making progress.
And by the same token, dare I say, the fact that we're mentioning it now in the way that we are does not mean that we regard the job as done and resting on laurels. This has been moved significantly up the agenda for the council and indeed all members included within that, much higher up the agenda, and we do need to keep it in mind, and that's very much, I think, what we're saying. We're not saying mission accomplished or whatever. It's an ongoing thing, and I'm sure that Councillor Burrows is very much aware of that and has set up mechanisms to enable us to do that.
I really feel that this has been discussed so much that we know what is going on, that it's an ongoing issue. You know, the gap is being reduced, hopefully, between free school meals and non-free school meals, all the risk elements. So I really feel that there isn't any more to say. It's really an ongoing risk.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, from the children's point of view.
Yes. More from the point of view of children, but there's also the question of safeguarding for adults, and that is as important. I don't know whether anybody wants to ask about that or to help us with that. Julie, is there anything that you can usefully remind us?
If members don't mind, just to remind that obviously, like Councillor Foley says, that adults is a complex agenda too, and in the last 12 months we've added more resource to that team. Those members will remember that we only had Hilary Smart as a 4-day-a-week member of staff, now being joined by a team manager and a further coordinator. And that was very much to manage the demand that's coming in, but also looking forward to the new Health and Social Care Act, which will come in next year, and further responsibilities that will bring. And it's enabled us to really become much more robust about screening and actually managing that demand forward. So it feels like we're in a much better place than we were perhaps 12, 18 months ago. Excuse me.
Thank you very much for that. It's unfortunate that in spite of Matthew's technical intervention, you've really got a bit of an echo, and I just hope that people won't be expecting too many train times or cancellations to be announced, because it's got that sort of sound to it. Just looking ahead for Adults Select, some of these issues will be on our agenda for January. So again, from the point of view of how we do things, we do keep things under regular review. I think, looking at the back, I can welcome our guests from CSSIW. We'll conclude the business for this item and possibly the next one, but then if you'd be able to come down to the front, and thank you for coming. Any issues under number 8 on ICT? I think we've been recognising those in both committees. And on the adult side, we heard only very recently that improved IT has made a great deal of difference, has it not, to the way people are able to handle parts of the work. Claire, do you want to say something about that?
Just to say that the new IT systems have been introduced in both adults and children's services, so it's Plant in children and Flow in adults, and from a practitioner point of view, in both services, they're pointing out and experiencing great improvements in terms of the flow of work.
Excellent. We don't have anybody to tell us where we are with the ICT aspects of schools, but grateful for that comment, Claire, from the point of view of social services. Any more on number 8? Moving then to number 9, which was reductions in our workforce due to budgetary pressures will impact on our capacity to deliver transformational change and improved performance. Cynics would say it will impact on our capacity to deliver anything, let alone transformational change, but I leave that to others to ask about. Any questions or comments on this?
Can I just make a comment? At the previous scrutiny this morning, we discussed this, didn't we, the effects of stress on the staff as the results of all the pressures that they're undergoing at the moment to do with budget cuts, etc., and also redundancies. And I think we talked about it then, and we heard that an eye was being kept open. So perhaps there's nothing more to discuss there, except to say that it's good that it's been identified.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. And for those not involved yesterday, there was, for members, there was an excellent seminar by Public Health Wales. We had the Director of Public Health for Gwent, Dr. Jill Richardson, and her colleague, Dr. Sarah Aitken, and they were very, very clear about where some of the big issues are for population health in our county. And they were very clear about the relationship between the health of our population and the quality of various environments, particularly the workplace. So this is something that we have referred to on several occasions, and something which we might well want to come back to. It's an important one. We do have to have a duty of care for our staff, as well as for the people that we serve. So I'm glad that this one has come up. On number 10, any issues around that? And okay, 11, probably not directly relevant to this committee, and that's the complete list. So, Matthew, you've led us into some very interesting territory. Any final questions or comments from members? I think we should then go back to Matthew's covering paper to remind ourselves what the recommendations were, and then we can draw some conclusions from this afternoon. The recommendations that we were given were to consider the strategic risks presented for the next 3 years, in particular those of relevance to the committee, and scrutinise the extent to which all relevant risks are appropriately captured, level of risk applied is appropriately based on the matrix in the policy, and mitigating actions are proportionate and appropriate. We've considered all of those things, and I think it would be right to say that we have a forward work programme which includes tackling some of the very issues that we've just talked about. In particular, the new Social Services Act and safeguarding will be coming up at an early stage in adults. Work is ongoing through children and young people. So of that recommendation, I'm going to ask you whether you think we can accept that. That we use the risk assessment on an ongoing basis. I think we've just demonstrated that. And that we use the risk assessment to inform the future work programme of the committee. I think we can already demonstrate that. So are you content, members of the committee, both committees, that Matthew has helped us to cover these important matters, and that we can, as it were, accept those recommendations? Are you going to propose that, Councillor Powell?
Propose that we
Thank
accept
you.
them.
Anybody going to second? Councillor Hickman, thank you very much indeed. Excellent, thank you. And thank you, Matthew. Now, are you going to take us through the next one?
I am, yes.
So, a quick change of name, or do you have any presentation or anything? Just talk to it.
No, just
Thank you very much indeed. So, but you didn't actually prepare the report, but no doubt it's been done with your full engagement.
Yes, the report was prepared by Sian Schofield, who's a member of my team. Sian doesn't work a Wednesday afternoon, so unfortunately the the shift from the original date of Tuesday to Wednesday meant she couldn't cover it, but well, not as competent as Sian in terms of covering these issues. I hope I'm sufficiently well briefed to do Sian's work some justice.
Thank you for stepping in. So we look forward to you taking us into this, Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. So, again, the format of this sort of report is going to be familiar to members. It's part of our regular series of performance reports to committee. Often at this stage of year, you see these appended to our improvement objective and outcome agreement reports. Certainly as far as the CYP committee goes, that isn't coming until January this year, a little later than usual. But it felt very timely that this should be brought before members for scrutiny this side of Christmas, where it's still very timely. So it covers a range of performance indicators in children's social services. So it's focused on the children's side. And the body of the report, the main body, as you get to the third side, and it switches to a sort of landscape format, has a sort of narrative focus. So what you see is the left-hand column is a mix of graphs and tables, beginning with the point at which children enter the service, so referrals through to outcomes, the outcomes for looked after children, whether people are settled in homes and in jobs. So hopefully the structure of the report allows you to sort of follow through, if not necessarily the journey of an individual child, then certainly the sort of typical areas of performance. So if I may just sort of draw out a couple of brief headlines and again, Chair, with your permission, leave it to questions. I mean, we have seen a big increase in the number of looked after children since the end of last year, from 108 to 121, and over the same time a decline in the number of children who are on the child protection register. So we're seeing far more children brought into care. That's a high number, and of course members will be quite familiar with this because it's one of the issues which has previously been highlighted to you with the associated budgetary pressures in children's services. Now, also on the agenda today, so I won't sort of dwell too much on some of these issues, is the three-year service and financial plan, which Claire has placed on the agenda, that will also touch upon some of these. So there may be a slight overlap in some of those issues, just to make you aware of that. The service is focusing in particular on a small number of key performance measures where we had been underperforming. There was considerable focus from the service last year, which led to a real increase in performance. And it was actually those key drivers in terms of children's services, and that was increasing the proportion of children in need reviews completed on time, increasing the proportion of children seen alone when they were assessed, increasing the timeliness of reviews of pathway plans, and statutory visits to looked after children. Those were real areas of focus. Now, what members will observe looking at this report is in the first 6 months of the year, there has been a dip in some of those key measures. So whereas we came to you at the end of last year saying this has been a really positive trajectory of performance, there has been a real pressure in the service in the first 6 months of the year, and you will see dips start to appear in some of that performance. And there's a number of graphs in the report. Apologies, I don't have the bundle number in front of me, but it's little number 11, where what you can let's see if I just sort of hold that to give you a flavour report, is you can track back performance over the past 13 months. So there's a red dot on those which indicates where we were in March, and that will enable members to see subsequent performance trends. Some of those within the report. So just to draw your attention, a number of different sections. So the first part from the body of the report does that narrative piece. So it talks about the number of referrals coming in, the proportion of decisions being made within one working day. Just to highlight to to members, and this is on sort of page 3 of the report. There's a figure there of 97.5%. Now, since this report was drafted, the service have been working on that, looking back at some of the data validation issues behind that, and I can now report to members that that figure is up to 100% or a couple of sort of decimal places below it. So that's one shift since this report has been written to you. And there are some service comments there that make reference to that. Moving on to the assessment section, number of children seen alone. You can clearly see a dip in the graph there, which is on little page 4 from March. So last year, you can see there'd been a big rise in the autumn, a subsequent dip that's come back up. But this is an issue that service are exploring at the moment. Clearly, in terms of the number of children seen alone, children have a choice as to whether or not they are seen alone. And in some circumstances, they may be wished to seen with someone who isn't the perpetrator of an allegation. So, for example, they may be perfectly happy to see a social worker with a teacher or someone who's a safe adult. So it's not the case that we'd expect that to be 100%. It's something which service managers have to keep quite a tight watch on to ensure they're aware of the reasons for any change. But again, just to reassure members, yeah, 100% is not a normal figure, but any change is something we have to be very aware of to fully explore the reasons.
I'm sure people might want to come back to you on that one.
Yes.
Unless you want to do it now.
If just, Matthew, I was just thinking that perhaps we should know that, because we're shown the graphs and we think, oh, that's bad, when it isn't bad. It's not good enough to have these put in front of us, and we don't know the reasons why, and people have the wrong impression. I'm not talking about us because we have the explanation here. I'm talking about members of the public who may be looking at this. So perhaps the explanation, could we request that it's put in somewhere, or I know there was a question mark about you were looking into, you were reviewing it, or not you, but it was being reviewed, and now you have the answer. Perhaps we should be told why, and then blame will not be apportioned where it shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think actually that's a very fair point, and I take that one on the chin. And interestingly, something which Claire has got us now working on, which is a much clearer process. So in the run-up to these reports coming before Select Committee, Claire has requested a clear timetable in children's services, so that we actually have the dates of meetings when these are discussed, and that managers' comments, including that sort of explanation, can be fully elaborated on in the report. So hopefully what you will see in future reports is a much clearer narrative, including that sort of context when these come before you.
Thank you.
Are you happy with that?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Any more questions on that one? There's some very interesting points coming up. Sorry, Councillor Powell.
Yeah, not a question. I was just going to going back to this bit when you said child seen alone. Do they find sometimes that if a child's seen with their teacher or responsible adult or carer, rather than the parent, that sometimes the child will say more or come out more? I know it can work both ways, but do you find that happens sometimes, that they're more apt to speak out when it's not somebody too close to them?
I don't know whether, Claire, you're in a position to respond to that. We haven't
No, it is difficult.
No,
Yeah.
necessarily got everybody
No.
here who could, but I'm sure you'll know something of this.
I just brought it up and said about the children being seen alone.
I just point to the word appropriate,
Yes,
and that's
appropriate,
when the
yeah.
service manager and the team manager are reviewing whether when children were seen alone, it was the right thing and in the right interest of the child. It's that professional judgment whether that was appropriate for them to be seen alone in order for the assessment and the information from the child to be elicited in the most appropriate way.
That's right. And I suppose it does vary depending on the circumstances. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next one, page little 5, children in need. Do you want to add anything to that? Because that is another one where you've got graph going down but there is a helpful set of comments there from the service. We have actually been here before on this issue, and I know that it's therefore not a new one, it's an ongoing one. But what it says here, and what we've heard before, is that it's essentially a recording issue. And I find it odd that a review can be considered late just because if it misses by just one day. And that seems to me to be really tough, particularly on the member of staff who has to kind of juggle all of these things. Now, maybe I'm being too undemanding, but it does trouble me that people can so quickly cross over into an area where their performance is somehow not acceptable. Jeff, Councillor Burrows.
Thank you, Chair. All I really wanted to add to the point, and the points are well made, and that's where we were. Now that we've got both the IT system set up for both children and adults, and what our IT infrastructure is now in place and has been put together by the practitioners themselves, it's actually going to be a whole new way of doing things. And clearly, KPIs come together as two parts. Firstly, the job that's done, and then the recording of the job that's done. And so we're actually now in a situation where the circumstances have actually materially changed, because we've now got far better intuitive IT to work with and staff that actually engage with it and have taken ownership of it. So I feel that going forward that we're going to be seeing far less influence now on KPIs that have been negatively affected because of IT impediments to clear reporting. And so, I mean, obviously time will prove this, but certainly having now the tools in which to do the job in place for the people that have to do this work and actually record it, I just sense that we're going to start seeing improvements as a consequence of that. Thank you.
Jeff, that's very helpful. I think Claire wants to come in on this as well, because it is important, particularly, as I've said on other occasions and indeed earlier today, the perception of how the service is doing can be easily skewed by reading a written report. And unless you have the context, or as we've said, another opportunity to see that things may have already changed, you could be unintentionally misled. Claire?
Yeah, I think the critical point I'd make is that it's so important that these indicators are owned and seen as important at team level, because that's really where performance is driven from. As the Cabinet member has said, it is a system now which will support team members in terms of doing that, because there can be all sorts of reasons why you would miss a review for just one day, such as the child not being well enough for the review to take place. So that pre-planning and the ownership by the team manager and the team of this is critically important. The other thing I'd say is that it's not uncommon, and Matt will correct me if I'm wrong, to see a dip in performance in the first quarter of the new year particularly. There's always a great effort towards the end of the year to make sure the PIs look as good as they possibly can, and that's quite right and proper, but the important thing is sustaining that performance into the new year, and that's some of what we're seeing in this Q2 report. And the important thing for us really is around the outcomes for the child, as well as making sure that the performance indicators are as good as they should be.
Thank you, Claire. And when we've perhaps got to the end of this item, I might come back to you for some more, perhaps more general comment, and that's really very helpful. Going through the document as it is, are there any issues that people want to raise on page 6, which is the, 5 and 6 really, which is the child protection section?
And just actually, I'm just sort of conscious that members obviously see from Jane Rogers in the safeguarding unit a trio of reports that also sort of goes before Cabinet and Council on quite a regular basis. So I am aware that members are very familiar and have opportunities to discuss these issues fairly frequently.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think that's a very helpful comment there. We're looking really at a snapshot, but the process in which we are engaged is much more substantial, And yes, you're absolutely right. It was at the last meeting, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah.
That we had some very detailed reports. So it's not necessarily the case that we need to start going into some of this in depth. But because some of them have been recurring, I think, you know, people are reminded. So we go to 7, page 7. Eight, anybody want to? This is particularly about looked after children. This, of course, bears on the authority's corporate parenting role as well.
Just here, if I just add very quickly at that point, in terms of one of the key indicators we've got there, statutory visits to looked after children, it's sort of marginally better than it was at this point in time last year, but it is one that requires quite a lot of ongoing focus. And just to assure members there that our independent reviewing officer, Leanne Parker, examines those reviews sort of very closely to undertake sort of quality assurance that what needs to be happening in terms of that work is happening.
Thank you. And of course, also in Children and Young People's Committee, we get additional insights into this when we look at how different groups of children achieve in school, and looked after children obviously are included in that. Care leavers on page 11. I think we've talked about that. I've asked previously whether we would be able to capture some of children's experiences as they leave care. And I've mentioned in the past work which was done in Torvine. Indeed, I think one of our own officers, one person who's one of our own officers now, instigated that work in Torvine, and very illuminating opportunity for young people to reflect on the different stages of their journey, as it were. And I would still welcome us being able to consider doing that.
Can I comment, Chair? Just to say that Tracy Gels, when she put last large report, had examples, case studies, which were very illuminating, and likewise Jane Roger. And that did help us to understand, have a greater understanding.
The last bit, any observations, comments on where we sit in the league table, which is the national, how we sit compared with other authorities and the Welsh average. Matthew, do you want to say anything about that?
Well, all I'd say in response to that, Chair, is that this is the position in terms of the comparisons as at the 31st of March. If you've taken it back sort of 18 months prior to that, we were lower down comparatively. I think lower than a position which, as an authority, we found acceptable to us. Considerable work has undertaken. That performance shifted up markedly in last year. Clearly, there is still room for improvement, and I know that officers in children's services are continuing to look at that, to meet on a regular basis and to use this data to try and prioritise work to drive those up and get us to a position we need to be, so that it's of benefit, not just, we're not talking reputationally here as an authority, we're talking about the impact and lives of the children and young people that depend on our services.
Okay, thank you. One of the perennials around this stage in the reports is where we need numbers and percentages. I think actually some way has been gone towards that in this document, and I think we're pleased to see that.
It's just, Chair, I was wondering.
Yes, what we've tried to do in the appendix 2, where it's got all of the detail, where there's a percentage shown, the number is underneath it.
Oh, yes.
What we sort of try to is a narrative piece, because I think it's quite hard sometimes when you're reading if there's an awful lot of numbers in a sentence. But for reference of members, anything hopefully with is a number adds meaning. It's been added into the table there.
It was a performance indicator, but yes,
Yeah.
much better.
But no, I'm conscious that that's something that has been raised previously by members and something we try to incorporate into these reports.
Okay, so we've received that update and we've considered it, but we've got, I was going to say, a once-in-a-generation opportunity. That's not really quite true or fair, but we do have a new chief officer, and I'm going to put you on the spot, Claire, because and ask you, in your time here, which has not been very long, and that's a good reason for asking, because you've got, as it were, a fresh perspective. What's your view of the performance of children's services? What, come to that, is good performance, and what do you expect going forward?
3 parts to that question, so well and truly put on the spot. I think in terms of where children's services are at the moment, and I think it's reflected in the report that I bring later on, certainly on a journey of improvement, which has made great progress over the last 18 months, as evidenced by the performance indicators which were achieved at the end of last year. And the real challenge for me working with Tracy in the service is to make sure that that improvement is sustained and that the service continue to have the support that they need in order to sustain that performance. I think how we measure good and what good looks like is partly through these performance indicators, but partly through what's been alluded to in terms of a number of the comments that have been made around the experience of the children and young people and the families who use our services and who go through our services and the outcomes from them. And I think as we move forward into the new Social Services and Wellbeing Wales Act, which will bring with it a new suite of performance indicators and measures, it's about making sure that we've got our own local measures and our own local experiential case studies and other things which we can bring forward to you to select to demonstrate really the difference that we're making and which is being made. I think in terms of where the service was, there clearly were some difficulties during the summer, which I know you are aware of in terms of the workforce, which caused a number of people to not be in work for a period of time, which in a small service like the one we have in Monmouthshire disproportionately impacts. The service is recovering from that and is looking now to be in a good place going into the rest of this year and next year.
Claire, thank you very much. Jeff, do you want to give us your take on the same question or questions?
I think Claire has pretty much covered it, even though obviously she's coming with a pair of fresh eyes. I feel the dynamic nature of what's been going on. I just continue to assure members of support of Cabinet in what is probably one, in my view, the most fundamental and vital part of our work in looking after vulnerable children. And I, for one, have a sense of confidence that whilst we have been in some fraught areas, not least because of the statutory demands and very complex needs that some of our youngsters are having to confront, that there are better times ahead because I sense there is more focus and there are more tools for us to do the job. So no, I've not got a great deal more, but very confident for the future.
Thank you. Now, looking ahead, I mean, there are a couple of recommendations for us on this report. Members should use, members should identify. Never sure about should applied to members. I always think invite is a preferable term, but never mind. But in all seriousness, looking ahead, there's going to be another framework, isn't there? A new framework, much more emphasis on outcomes. So in very general terms, can you give us an idea of how this area of our activity might look in the future, if you know? I think Matthew, Claire?
We're doing the work at the moment to look at those new measures which have come out and have been laid down for us statutorily to be working to from next financial year, and sort of just undertake a baseline of assessment of where we are against some of those. I think for the children's services part of the world, it's being very clear what we may need to continue to count from the current indicators that are important to us, as well as looking at those new measures going forward. But certainly the focus far more on outcomes, far more in making sure that you have something which gives you in perhaps a more qualitative way an understanding of what the experience of children and young people is, as well as sort of the case studies that we can bring forward from time to time and illuminate reports.
Thank you very much. Matthew?
I'm not sure.
Services, the department's been working on concentrating on the implementation of the recommendations from the inspection that took place in November 2014. We've heard some of the Matthew has talked about some PIs earlier, just prior to this presentation, and I'm obviously concentrating, as Margaret said, on last year's, and in terms of progress for last year, for 14-15, statutory visits to looked after children increased from 65 to 83%, significant improvements there. The timeliness of reviews for children in need, this year it's 86%, although it's gone down, those figures have gone down since, but clearly end of year figures hopefully are going to look differently this year. Recruitment to permanent posts, a number of permanent posts. I know a business case, I think I was here actually when a business case was being put forward in April, and we recognise that those terms in terms of children's service, that's very much a long-term plan. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and we absolutely acknowledge that. Clearly the support from members is very important, and I think that's evidenced in terms of the protection of budgets to date in children's services and the additional funding. I mean, in years to come, that's going to be much more of a challenge to be able to continue with that. Greater emphasis being placed on support through community networks. We came to do an inspection of domiciliary care fairly recently, and we did speak to a number of people, a small number of people, but people are saying to us they want to remain in their own home. In line again with the Act, people are saying, you know, they don't want an awful lot. People don't want an awful lot, but they just want what they know. They want people coming in. They want continue support that where there's continuity. And I think one of the big messages, really, I think from us and as well that comes from you, is social care is everybody's business. It's just not social services business. It's everybody's. It's a whole council affair. Continuing with the responses to last year's areas for improvement, and one of the things, actually the way in which the report is presented, I will be repeating some of the things again. It's just the way in which the report set out actually. We meet in terms of monitoring things like action plans. We meet with heads of service, as Margaret said, about 3-4 monthly, and I feel that we have very good, open, honest, and transparent discussions about the issues, about working through problems and issues where there are, and about celebrating the successes and the improvements that have been made, of which there have been many over the past year in children's services. There have been improved working relationships with CAMS, with children adolescent mental health services. Previously that was very hard to access, and you've managed to actually be able to access, to have somebody coming in to do some of that work on a case-by-case basis. That's a really positive way ahead, because that hasn't happened very much in some other local authorities are still struggling with that. Safeguarding training has been delivered to the Directorate and also to education, and also the partners like police. I know I've spoken to Tracy, and I understand you've had some workshops around that, and that's really good about developing that practice, and about using the same language, and about getting together and talking through the issues, and seeing how best practice works, and how to move forward with that. Structure and practice in the family support team. I mean, clearly there have been improvements. That's something that's going to take some time, and I think that's work in progress, and it will be ongoing. Statutory visits to looked after children. That's had improved over the course of the last year from 65 to 83%. And I think that's absolutely key, that those visits have to take place. I mean, clearly there's a statutory obligation, but it's about assuring yourselves as an authority that the children's needs are being met, and that their placements are appropriate for them on an ongoing basis. In terms of audits, performance and practice and looked after children. That again, that's ongoing. There's been a training program that has been developed and is being rolled out. It probably has been rolled out through all of the teams within Children's Services by now. And I know regular audits are being undertaken at a service manager level. There's been progress in relation to PEPs, to personal educational plans. Children need views have improved significantly. I think the appointment of the care leavers, the apprentices, to ensure that the views of young people are heard, and they sit in the corporate parenting group, and that's a really innovative way forward, because there's nobody better to tell you about what it's like being in care than people who've actually been there. So that's hugely important and a really positive step. I think because of that, those two people actually are going to be able to improve the understanding and develop the understanding of all of the people on the corporate parenting board, because they're the people who are going to be able to answer the questions about the experiences of actually being in care. The strategy is being developed and has been implemented, and it just means that needs to be continued to be embedded, really. And I understand that, and somebody mentioned it earlier, Tracy had said to me about case studies that have been presented and that people have been able to work through and get a really good idea of what it's like and what experiences are like for children and young people. In terms of adult services, certainly, and again, when we came to do the work, I visited the South Monmouthshire mental health team, and as I say, we're here doing a review on domiciliary care very recently, and it's very much, the emphasis is very much on finding joint solutions, and that's through partnership working, and that's. And that's something that you can find actually at every level, I think, in Monmouth when you speak to staff, and that clearly is the way forward, and the best way forward, because, as I say, social services aren't going to be able to continually, fund at the rate at which they're funding, meet demand at the rate at which it's being met, and needs are changing, and we need to look more innovatively at how things are actually done. Fewer people living in care homes, you have some of the lowest figures in Wales, if not the lowest. And again, that's very much in keeping with your strategy about independence and about creating independence and encouraging people to live at home. There's effective engagement with service users, and that concentrates on the positives. And what I like is, and what I hear in Monmouthshire is, it's about what matters to people. It's about having those conversations about what matters to people. And sometimes we as professionals make assumptions about what we think is best for people. And I mean, the best thing absolutely is to ask them what they want for themselves. And the Raglan project is a very good example of that. And I know that you're building on the success of that throughout other hubs. That takes time, but it's just really important that it continues with energy, and you continue to work on that as a priority. I think it's very positive that the department from head of service down have been trained in dementia care and train in dementia care. That's a really important step forward, particularly when a lot of the people that you work with are people who have dementia, and it's about understanding what their needs are, and when you speak to them, the kind of things that social workers need to be thinking about, the things that are important, what's important to them, and just having a greater understanding about that. Safeguarding, additional resources and reshaping of the team, and that was about to ensure that there was a timely response to concerns. There's new safeguarding placement is being developed. We've had experience with the CSSIW work extremely closely with the safeguarding team, and very positively. And we have had experience where we have worked around some issues around provider performance, and that's been really, really good joint working, where we've undertaken joint inspections, joint monitoring, and sharing information. To continue with the areas of progress, support to people with dementia and their families. We've talked about that, about local services, and as I said, people talk about wanting reliability, consistency. They want to know who's coming through the door. I visited people who were having packages that were visits for 3-4 times a day, maybe more, and they were very, very happy and very grateful that they were receiving that at home. And in fact, there wasn't a situation where they said, well, actually people said, well, really, you might be safer going into to residential care. Some of siblings, children had suggested that might be, and social workers were very clear about who was making that decision, that it wasn't the family, it was the individual, where they had capacity, obviously. We talked about the commitment to training for in dementia care. I mean, that's accredited training, and it's expensive training, and that says something about the commitment, I think, of the authority. Ongoing support for people with learning disabilities. My Day My Life project, meaningful opportunities rather than attending day centre. It's recognised again that that's a long journey, and one of the things that I want to do is I want to actually go and visit that early next year. I've planned with Julie that I'm going to do that, along with a number of other things. The engagement with the sector around the transformation in domiciliary care. Myself and Margaret both attended that one of those days, Turning the World Upside Down days. And I mean, certainly that's very much, it's still in its infancy, it's still visionary, it's about moving that vision to actual implementation. And I know there's a lot of work going on, and that's going to need a lot of input, building relationships with providers, sitting around the table with them. And that's about building relationships, and it's about trust. There's clearly got to be an element of trust in that. And clear about, in fact, the direction that the local authority is actually moving in. Areas for improvement. Talked a bit about rolling out things like the Raglan project and the My Day My Life project, and I guess it's easy for us to sort of say, you really need to get on and to do that. And I know that a series of workshops have taken place about raising awareness and about the future approaches really to how services are being provided. And I guess for some people that's changing culture for them. It takes a long lead in time, but it's important that work is carried on. In relation to DALS and the Mental Capacity Act, that really there is about being able to recognise when DALS needs to be triggered. And that's an issue for a number of providers as well, who don't know sometimes when they need to talk to individuals about mental capacity and the processes that surround that. This next one, carer support. This is always a contentious one, and I think it's to do with data recording. In fact, I'm sure it's to do with data recording. There are a number of authorities, actually the PIs and the definition of the PIs, really the way in which they're interpreted in local authorities is very different. I think, again, I've agreed with Julie. I know that you have a good carer support group. I know that there's lots of things happening, and Julie said, just please come and see it, and that's absolutely reasonable for her to say that, and I'm going to do that. It's one of the to-dos early next year as well. Children's services, we've talked about, and somebody just mentioned earlier as well about the improvement journey, and there were the exact words that I had down. Children's services are on an improvement journey. The post-inspection plan was developed and is being implemented. That's being monitored and reviewed. As I say, myself and head of service sit down on a 3-monthly basis, and we talk about the progress that has been made. It's extremely detailed. There are good mechanisms in place for consulting with children. Again, we talked about the 2 reps, but things like training and play therapy, the football team, the one-to-one interaction that there is between staff and youngsters, and about capturing that. And I know that there's a children's care council that's either being developed or has been developed. It might have. It's in its early stages, and I have asked Tracy if I can have an invite to that, and she is asking the young people. But I mean, they might say no. Who knows? But I hope I will be invited to that, and that's something for the new year. But it's okay if they do it. It's okay equally if they don't. It's their group. In terms of children's services, the assessments that take place are timely. It was the quality and depth really of assessments that where there was a weakness. But I know that the department's undertaken a review of the quality, and training has either taken place or is planned to take place, and that's both internally and also with partner agencies, because it's joint. Child protection investigations. and decisions that are made are appropriate. They're appropriate in terms of when they progress to referral. That's accurate. They're appropriate in terms of the fact that experienced social workers undertake those assessments, and also appropriate in terms of the decisions that are made in relation to child protection. Okay. Again, it was referred to earlier by Matthew. The level of children in need, there's been a 26% increase, and that's in contrast really to the national downward trend, which is about -4%, I think. And we have discussed the reasons for this, or what's behind those figures, because figures themselves are you need to know what and have an understanding of what's behind them. And we've had some discussions. I've had some discussions with Head of Service about whether that's just about raising awareness in terms of the focus of safeguarding training and that work that's been undertaken by the Safeguarding and Quality Assurance Unit. There's been good progress in fostering services, certainly clarity about what the service is about and focus of that. Compliance is met fully. You've got a number of new foster carers that are being recruited to meet the demands, and the level of special guardianship orders has increased, and that's right and proper, and that again is good practice, where people looked after children really, if they're going to be looked after, and that's the very end of the line. It's not something that you really consider. And take a thoughtful approach to, but it's more appropriate, if it is appropriate, for maybe wider family to actually undertake those functions, and look at things like external placements as a last resort. And I know that you've got additional resources to actually start to do some of that work, and it's happening already. Work in terms of the JAF and TAF, I know that you've got a JAF coordinator, and there's training being undertaken, and I think work around, again, partnership working around thresholds and about what that actually means. The numbers of looked after children have gone up to 121. When this was written, it was around 108, and we looked at, and you'll see in the report, there was a trend of about a 6-year trend, and that had been fairly stable over the last 6 years. I mean, it is what it is, and if children actually need to be looked after, they need to be looked after. In terms of numbers, aren't that important in that respect, and they will fluctuate. Areas of progress. We talked again about the actions addressed in the recommendations arising from the inspection. There's been progress in relation to CAMS, which we've talked about, and we've talked about the apprenticeship posts. And I think it's just so important about the fact that means that you have true representation in terms of getting children and young people's views, and that's just so important in terms of driving forward change on developments. Areas for improvement. The increase in the level of children on the Child Protection Register, that's risen from 37 to 51. It had by the end of March. And I know that Head of Service was undertaking a review on that, and looking at the reasons for it, and having a better understanding of the reasons behind that, really. And I know that we're going to, again, that's going to be something we'll monitor together. Transitions for children with disabilities, that was one of the identified priorities in last year's report, and it's one of the areas I think where other priorities really have taken precedent in that. So that's an area that needs further addressing, and again, the inspection implementation plan is happening. We're almost there. Leadership, governance, and direction. A number of changes at both managerial and operational level. We had a new service in post in April 2014, and high numbers of agency staff, and those upped again over the course of the summer, I understand, as well. New chief officer in post, so significant changes really for people. An overspend in children's services. And I think for an area like Monmouthshire, you just need 1 or 2 youngsters to have external placements that are very expensive and need to be because of the issues and the concerns and the challenging behaviours and complex natures of some of those placements. That really staggers your finances and doesn't help budgets. But it's important you still have to continue with providing and covering statutory functions. additional funding, the 1.2 million additional funding for children's services to strengthen stability. You can see that that's actually happening with the recruitment of staff in key places. Savings targets within adult services were achieved. And that's because I think things were managed in an innovative way, really. Fewer placements in residential care, that always helps with budgets, and the change in practice in the way in which services are being and service models are changing and being delivered. Certainly, corporate parenting arrangements are robust and challenging as they should be. And commissioning new QA processes are introduced, and again we work very closely. Our inspectors work very closely with the team, and that work is very positive, I think, from both our perspectives. Areas of progress in terms of leadership and governance, ongoing work with health and social care. Very mature relationship that there is at every level, I think, both operational and strategic, in terms of your work with and Iron Bevan particularly, integrated teams. When we visited the mental health team in the south, I sat in on a team meeting and I couldn't tell who was a nurse and who was a social worker, and that was great. I mean, that really spoke volumes, really. Increase the capacity and responsiveness in relation to recommendations to drive improvements. I mean, again, that points around the business case that was put forward for the additional post to meet demand in children's services. Strengthening of corporate parenting arrangements, we've already referred to, and level of challenge and understanding of select committee. Select committee have had those cases presented to them. It's the whole thing about looking after children, I think, is particularly, it's always a moving feast, and it's really important that trends change, policies change, the direction of travel changes, and it's just such a high profile area. It's continuous learning, really, I think, for all of us. In terms of areas for improvement, it's just how really the authority will make sure that it safeguards children in the light of the financial pressures, really, that the local authority is facing and will continually face. Okay, and that's.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry that you didn't have the technology to help you. So I guess, well, we're in a interesting situation because we've got your major report, but your presentation, quite rightly, has talked about some of the things that have happened since. So members may want to engage on either or both. Are there any questions from members? Questions initially. There may well be some comments and suggestions, but are there any questions to begin with? Councillor Smith, I'd be very pleased. You've sat here all day without being able to say very much. As a small reward for Christmas, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you very much, Chairman. It's very interesting, and I'm very grateful that I can sit here and listen. Thank you very much. You've made reference to the external placements for individuals from here. Equally, it works the other way. And I've always been a little intrigued as to how we monitor placements from other authorities that occur within Monmouthshire and ensure that the care there is appropriate. It isn't our responsibility, I understand. I think it's yours. So how is it monitored? And off the top of your head, how many individuals do we actually have placed in Monmouth from elsewhere? Thank you, Chairman.
That's an interesting question. We wouldn't know how many children weren't from Monmouth and who were placed within Monmouthshire. That's not information that we would have. My response in terms of who would be responsible for that would be the local authority that's paying for that placement, that's actually funding that placement. We would have responsibility, for instance, if it was a service, we would have overall responsibility for a service that was regulated in the area. But in terms of the individuals, we would be looking at the systems and the processes and the policies, etc., that we're in, and issues around safeguarding. And I mean, safeguarding's everybody's business, isn't it? But in terms of numbers, that's not information that we would hold. There are some local authorities that do have arrangements, just reciprocal arrangements with other local authorities, and they do undertake things like reviews. But clearly, that's not something that's appears to be happening from what you're saying in Monmouthshire. But it would be the funding authority would have the responsibility for those placements.
I come back, Chairman.
If you wish, yes.
Thank you very much. I find it surprising that we could have 10, 20, 30, 40 children placed somewhere throughout Monmouthshire and not know directly who is responsible. One wouldn't want anything ever to go wrong, but if it did, it would doubtless become, publicly, it would be Monmouthshire's fault. But we do need to know that number, I feel, Chairman.
Claire, can you help us with this?
Thank you, Chair. Placing authorities need to advise the authority that they're intending to place in prior to making the placement, and if we consider that we can't or there aren't the appropriate services locally to meet the needs of the children who are intending to place, there is a dialogue with that placing authority around that. For example, in terms of accessing local health services, we would need to be confident with alongside our health colleagues that those services are available locally in order to meet the needs of the children whom are being placed. As Anna's quite rightly said, the responsibilities in terms of review and for those placements are with the placing authorities, but we do have responsibilities around safeguarding for children who are placed within our authority area from other authorities, and indeed adults who would be placed in this authority area from other authorities as well. So it is a responsibility, it is an issue for us in terms of out-of-county placements into the authority, which is why all authorities, if they possibly can, place as close to home as possible. Yes, but I will get you the numbers. It's one of the things I'll go away and check following this, but my expectation is that there would be a register.
Are you reassured a bit by that? Thank you. I'm taken back to my time in Welsh Government, where any could question the stock response from the civil services. We don't actually collect information about that. So I'm glad the information is available, and grateful to both for answering your question. Any more questions from members on what Anne has told us before we go any further? I can't kind of read the room to see whether you're bursting to come in on questions. I will, I think, then move to, now clearly, I'm sure our guests will be aware, there are clearly issues for us in timing, because we've had a substantial report that quite rightly came to us, but we've also had an update, and members might want to reflect on that and what that means for their ability to scrutinise. I'm glad that the level of challenge and understanding of the select committees has been noted as being, I don't know what, is it an area of progress? Let's see if we can get even further with that today. You wanted to say something, Penny?
Yes, just as chair of CYP, but I just thank you very much for that positive report, first of all. I mean, it was so nice to go through it and feel that it was, welcoming to the Social Services Department. That was lovely. It's just, it's very hard to comment when it's old, and obviously being CYP, we've been heavily involved with Estin and all of the progress made there in every avenue, especially safeguarding as being one of them, which crosses over with you. And so it's very hard to actually comment now because it's in retrospect. And I'm very glad that you didn't persist with percentages and numbers, because they are meaningless when it's older and progression has been made. But yes, that's all I can say, is that it's not a lack of interest. It's there were lots of positive comments, and we're very grateful. But a lot of water has passed under this bridge in the last month or so regarding this. But thank you.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to ask, is there any particular area that you think we should really be concentrating on? I know there's more than one, but any particular area that we really need to be looking at in greater detail?
I would say, clearly we have talked about the journey that Children's Services are on. I think that I think that a very detailed action plan responding to all of the recommendations in that report this time last year are being worked through. And I feel very positive about that. And I think that, again, earlier on there were references made to the fact that there were some blips during the summer, which I knew about, and I'd had discussions with head of service about, and that was just life happens and people get sick. And but I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we're monitoring. We've got an open and honest relationship, and that's a very detailed action plan, and I've no reason to think that it won't be achieved.
That's helpful.
You
Thank you. I think. Do you want to come in? And then I think Councillor Burrows wants to come in as well.
I'd just like to add that, and I suppose this is the answer I'd give to any local authority. I think it was mentioned earlier on today. If I was asked that question, for me, it's about focusing on outcomes in both adults and children's services and prevention, early intervention. So if you look at children's services, I guess, you know, are you? And I'm not asking this question because I don't think this that you are, but are you confident that you're able to manage demand and stem the flow coming into children's services by good quality prevention, early intervention?
Councillor Burrows.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I listened with great interest to the items that you kindly referred to, and it struck me listening to it, you know, just how we've moved on. You know, quite a little bit of time has elapsed since then. It was a bit interesting reflection on where we were. There was just a couple of observations I just wanted to make, more for information really, just to kind of put in context. You mentioned quite rightly that we're delighted to have two new apprentices who actually sit on our corporate parenting panel, which I'm delighted and privileged to be the chair of. And certainly the one thing that I'm going to be using them to help me with and helping the panel with next year is the point that was raised quite correctly in a recent full council meeting. There's the aspiration of this authority as the largest employer in the county to start trying to find work opportunity and apprentice placements for looked after children within the authority, because there's massive opportunity there for in parks, admin, in IT and everything else. And so we're going to be working on that, because they can be a very good intermediary between ourselves and their friends, colleagues, as other looked after individuals, to actually see whether or not we can move that forward. And you did make reference to getting a children in care council. Now, certainly that was our aspiration at the outset for the apprentice that we now became two apprentices that were going to help us form that. So yes, we still want to do that, but now that we've actually got this really substantial component piece in place with these two super girls who are actually helping us, that we feel already we've got those kind of connections. We're going to allow this thing to grow organically. So rather than push to say, look, we're going to do it for its own sake, we're going to just do what they feel they want to do and is what is important to us. You made reference, of course, to the Raglan project, and something that I know is very dear to all of our hearts, especially Penny's, and to let you know that holistic approach is going to be rolled out throughout the entirety of the in-house domiciliary care by next February of next year. And it's also my intention, when you made reference to dementia care training, to be bringing a report to council in the new year with a view to actually getting the authority as a dementia care friendly authority. So whereas we've actually, just when people thought they'd had enough training with safeguarding I'd imposed on them, I'm going to start making them think about dementia care friendly training as well, which is, it doesn't take up much time, but it just gives people complete insight into the needs of others. And with so many people out and about working with the community at large, giving them the tools to understand what's going on in their daily lives when they experience or see something, and give them the understanding of what to do when they see it, is very important. So it was just really it was something of them and then and now, and I just wanted to offer that up. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to bring things towards a conclusion now with two questions, really. One for our guests from CSSIW, and then another one for our officers, I think. So looking ahead, Margaret and Anne, what challenges do you see presented to this authority in particular by the demands of the Act that's coming in? I mean, you've suggested that we're well geared, but do you see any particular challenges that we need to have at the top of our minds?
Anne may want to add to this because Anne's got the detail, but again, I go back to that. I suppose, I think adult services have been on a journey for the last number of years, 3-4 years, and Julie probably say more than that. And they're on a good trajectory. I think children's services are on the way, but again, I go back to this prevention, early intervention. In the face of the financial budgets constraints that you will face, statutory services will always have to be delivered. That's not something you can get away from. So it would seem sensible that the best thing to do, and also the best thing for families and children, that we can identify issues at the earliest opportunity and prevent children and families from coming into those more expensive statutory services. I think that's probably the challenge for Monmouthshire, but also for all local authorities. And you may want to add to that with some of the more detail.
I think really the only thing that I would want to add is about, it's probably going to be a challenge for the local authority to say no. And I think that you're going to have to say, I mean, you've obviously started doing that because you're looking at locality, at support, at families, etc. And really, I think one of the things is going to be, you're going to have to bring everybody in the council on that journey with you to be able to achieve that. But I think there will come a time when you do have to say no, and you'll have to make very stark decisions about what's provided and what's not provided, and who picks that up, and if in fact it is something that can't be picked up and may have to be kicked into the long grass, and there will be difficult decisions, I think.
Thank you. Now I'm going to ask the officers if they can answer me on the old Latin tag of quis custodiet custodies, who guards the guardians. So Julie and Claire, are there any areas where CSSIW could do better? In the spirit of Christmas, of course.
I'll go first. It's very interesting. I'm doing all that feedback stuff again. Can you hear me? Yeah. I think both Margaret and Anna have alluded to, we have a very good relationship, which I think is in the spirit of progression. And certainly one of the key operating principles for us is that we have good relationships with the people of Monmouthshire, the staff that deliver the support to people of Monmouthshire, and it's important that we have good relationships with the regulators. I would have my fairy wand wish for CSSIW would be any assistance that could be given to help us with our current difficulties in the domiciliary care market. And I don't think that's within any of our gifts as we currently sit here. But the conditions of the market, both in Monmouthshire, regionally and nationally, are such that, never mind the constraints around money, we might have the money, but we might not be able to buy the services to support people. And as we are moving towards Christmas, we've got some real challenges around people having to make some very difficult decisions for themselves, which we're not shying away from, whereby some people that either we can't find the support for may have to go into respite over Christmas, which is unheard of for us. So those are massive challenges, which I don't think are going to be just Christmas challenges. I think they're going to move into next year. And the work that we're doing around Turning the World, I suppose it's where we'd want the support from CSIW to be open and on that journey with us, which is we've got to find a different way of delivering domiciliary home care support. And that might need some different rules to apply as we move through those experiments. So it's making sure that we're going to keep everybody cited on it, and we involved you very early, but it's with an outcome that actually we might end up with a better market and a more resilient, sustained market for the future, because that's a real issue at the moment. So please, that's my magic wand.
Julie, yes, if you'd like to, please. Thank you. That would be helpful.
I think in terms of domiciliary care, I think we recognise that it's a very, very complex situation and becoming more complex. You'll be aware that we're doing our domiciliary care review at the moment. So there's two things really. I think what we can do is about reflecting, holding a mirror up and reflecting for all the government and for all to see what the state of the nation is in terms of domiciliary care market and some of the issues and the relationships between commissioners and domiciliary care providers. And that's what we're hoping to do through the review, which we're currently in the process of doing, and hoping to report on that sometime in the new year, depending on whether we can get it in before PERD or whatever. The second thing I would like to say is about, obviously we're the regulator and we inspect domiciliary care. The new regulation and inspection of social care bill, which will become an act soon, will give us the opportunity to look at how we regulate and inspect domiciliary care and other services, but among those domiciliary care. And there's an opportunity there for us in terms of what we learn from the review, and I'm sure the review will bring out some of the issues that you're talking about, and how we then use that information to inform how we move forward with inspection and regulation.
Thank you, Margaret. And Claire, do you want to share your Christmas list?
Very big one. I think from my point of view, I think the approach to the relationship I've witnessed, and it's very, very early days for me in Monmouthshire, is very positive, and that is to take the figures and the performance indicators and to really understand the story behind that. My plea, I guess, because CSSIW have an All Wales role, is to help us to look where the good practice is across the rest of Wales. I know it'll be there within the individual evaluation reports of authorities, but they're so summarised by the time they get to that stage. And I know it'll be there within the inspector's annual report. But if you can see something that we're perhaps not as progressed as we would want to be on, for example, around early intervention and prevention in children's social services, and you know there's another authority who've got that cracked or are certainly more progressed than we are, then point us in their direction. We've all got our networks, but we're all not as good as we should be at looking over the borders of different authorities within Wales and doing that because we're so busy doing the day job. So that would be my plea, really, is that showing us what good looks like. If it is out there within Wales, then highlight that to us.
Thank you, all four of you. I know I put the question lightly, but it was with serious intent. From my point of view as chair of a scrutiny committee, I've very much, and today a joint meeting, I've very much appreciated you coming and your candour. One or two things you might want to take back to headquarters would be, I'm not convinced that CSSIW is as locked into Estin and WAO as it might well be, because with Estin and WAO, they do feed off each other in terms of not asking us to do again what another has already asked us to do, that sort of thing. That might be something to think about. And I'm not just thinking of a local level. This also has emerged nationally. We had a national scrutiny conference, it was earlier in the year, with the heads of all those three organisations, and they all made that commitment to work together. And it really does help us, particularly as a small authority, if the triumvirate of key regulators, WAO, Estin and CSSIW, are working together. I know that you are. If you could do so even more closely, that really would, I think, be welcome to us. And finally, and I appreciate again that there are processes and procedures, but we say this every time, if it was at all possible to have a report closer to when it had been done, then I think that would also be appreciated. But I recognise there are all sorts of problems, editorial, technical, policy, goodness knows what. But if you could bear that in mind. And we thank you very much for coming and for speaking to us and frankly for being so frank. And I'm sure we're all delighted as members to see that even though there have been some changes on our officer team, there are good relationships in place and being built on between yourselves and us. And if you can help Julie and Claire with the two questions that they posed to you, I'm sure we would sleep more easily while we wait for Santa to come down the chimney. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Happy Christmas.
And happy Christmas. Last item, I think, is from Claire. And you've got a 3-year service and financial plan. Now, I don't know how you want to handle this. You might just want to give us a very quick you know, sort of start of a 10 as to why it's come, and then we might want to just feed a few things to you. I don't want you to feel that you've got to do a sort of mega presentation, because this is clearly the beginning of ongoing work, Claire. Is that fair?
That's very fair, Chair. And obviously the purpose in bringing this plan this afternoon is to build on all of the work which has already started and is progressed very well in Children's Social Services. We've talked about this afternoon, and really taking the steer and the lead from what Anne, I think, said at the end of her presentation, which was the challenge we face as an authority of continuing to fulfil our statutory duties in Children's Social Services to get the best possible outcome for children and young people within the financial envelope which is afforded to us. So the plan tries to set out that needs to happen over a medium-term period, and therefore it's a 3-year plan. There are 4 themes within the plan which are around quality and effectiveness of social work practice, and this has got to be very much driven by practice. The capacity and capability of the workforce, and we know, and we've referred to the challenges of getting a permanent and sustained workforce into children's social services. Improved commissioning, one of the themes within that is the shift to early intervention and prevention, and how we make sure that we are really targeting interventions in an evidence-based way for step down from care and prior to any step up into the statutory services. And all that links to improved service and financial performance and accountability. So taking my steer from you, Chair, I won't go into any more detail within the report. I'm sure members have read it, but more than happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Claire. Any response from members? You can see that you've set the Y and the mono alight, but I don't think that's any reflection on what you've done. I think it's a reflection on the end of a long day. I think there might be 1 or 2 quick comments, and then I'd like to make a suggestion that I think you've already anticipated.
It will be very short and sharp. You might be very reassured to hear that, because the solutions have got to come in from within. It's really looking and building on some of what we have heard this afternoon from CSSIW around the front door, making sure that the front door is operating in the way that it needs to. Lots of noise around thresholds between both ourselves and partners, and whether we've got thresholds right coming in at the front door, and what the alternatives are. So that really informs our commissioning work, doesn't it? So if we have children we're taking through statutory processes because the alternatives aren't there in terms of other commissioned services more upstream, then that's what we need to focus on, but it'll be very short and sharp.
Any other questions? This is tricky because it's a joint meeting, but I think what we've actually got here, if the Chair of Children and Young People will either bear me out or challenge me. What we've got here, Claire, is an opportunity that I don't think the committee's had previously. In adults, we've become very used to talking with, for example, Julie and others about the transformation of services, about some of the important ways of needing to do things differently. And I think what the potential here in your outline is actually for just that, as far as children's services are concerned. So I think we would encourage you to do that. And I think, again, with the Chair's permission, we would encourage you to feel, insofar as you ever can be in a public meeting, but there are other ways as well, of not being anxious about sharing things where you're still shaping them. It does give us, we do have an opportunity to be critical friends, and we take that, I think, very seriously. I know both committees do. So if what you might like to reflect on after today is if there are ways in which we as a committee or members of the committee, formally or informally or both, could help you to take things forward, because it's an important thing to get this right. You're also possibly further down the track going to be looking again at expenditure type issues. That's pretty certain one way or another. All of those things, I think, we as committee would want to feel were on the table so that there were no surprises, and the recognition of that need for no surprises is that, you know, we're forewarned, we're forearmed, and crucially and hopefully will be on side. Is that a fair summary, members, of how we would like to proceed? So I think rather than go analytically into what you've done now, to recognise what you've said yourself, and it's in the paper, this is the first part of a kind of iterative process. Others may be involved as well as you. We welcome that, and come back to us as it shapes up, and with that offer that we will be, as I've said, critical friends, because I think we do see challenge as a constructive rather than an antagonistic thing. And I know I'm okay saying that because there's heads nodding, in particular Councillor Wintle, and I always know I'm all right if he nods his head on something like that. So are members content? So our conclusions from today, we've made a great deal of, we've made considerable mileage today over a number of different reports. We thank all those who have come and spoken to us today and have presented reports. And I think it's fairly true to say that the common denominator for all the things we've looked at this afternoon is that they have been springboards, either to remind us of things that we are already aware of and working on and don't want to forget, or new things that we need to bring into focus. So I think it's actually been constructive, it's been useful, and I'm grateful to everybody who has taken part in the proceedings. I've also been desperately doing some counting, and I'm very pleased to think that resources will be sufficient for all of you, members and guests, and you, Teresa, as our patient observer, to come along towards the Mendel. I'm to genetics now, aren't I? The members' kitchen, where we will be pleased to serve you with a mince pie from both.
Or even on the what's that place called out there with the sea?
Oh, good. Oh, somewhere. Well, anyway, and that is a small thank you from the chairs of both committees who've met here jointly today. Thank you, and can I wish you all a very happy Christmas, and look forward to you coming back to an even busier New Year. Thank you.